Hello and welcome to a review of Techland's 2022 action-adventure RPG, Dying Light 2. In this video, I hope to be able to help you decide whether to buy this game with our unique 10-pillar of gaming scoring system, and I'll do that with a guarantee and promise of no spoilers. Now, this game is of course a sequel to Dying Light, released in 2016, but I'm not just going to be comparing this game to that one, as a lot of people who are watching this review probably haven't played the first game, and it's also worth noting that you don't have to understand the story. If you like this review, then please do take a few seconds to subscribe. I'm just one guy making videos about video games, and your support is hugely appreciated. This is Dying Light 2. Should I buy it? The story. Always the best and the most important place to start within a review, and perhaps the area that this game was under the most scrutiny. Its predecessor Dying Light was a very good game and really burst onto the scene, but was let down by its pretty uninspiring story. So, have Techland learnt their lesson? In short, no. You'll play far worse stories than this in your video game career, but you'll also play a lot better. The overall story began in quite a promising way and sets up an interesting and intriguing tale, but ultimately it becomes a bit boring. There were lots of fun missions and the odd twist here and there, which did genuinely surprise me, but a good story should inspire you to play the next main story mission. In most iconic games, I'm rushing straight to the next quest starting point because I really want to know what is going to happen next. In this game, it felt more like a, I haven't played a main story mission in a while, probably should. A perfect representation of this game's story is how long it's taken me to do this review. I bought Dying Light 2 on day one and intended to get the review out within a couple of weeks, but here we are a few months on. Now, I never rush reviews, but this game just felt like a real slog to get through. However, its saving point is its narrative-defining decisions. Now, narrative-defining decisions is a term we hear a lot in the video gaming community, and often they're not actually that narrative-defining. Telltale Games are the prime culprits for this. However, in Dying Light 2, although it's not as narrative-bending as, say, a Detroit Become Human, and you are all roughly going to end up in the same place, your choices do actually change the game. The narrative and fate of certain characters really do lie in your hands, and it can even affect your ending. Speaking of the ending, it was actually pretty strong, including twists and difficult gameplay and decisions, but that's not the issue here. It's, well, everything else. I worry that most gamers will miss out on the impressive ending, as the lack of quality in the middle part of the story will likely lead to gamers just giving up. Overall, it's a story which, to begin with, seemed unique and boasted bags of potential, but the execution was poor, and you'll likely have more fun running around and enjoying the game's exceptional parkour elements, which we'll come on to. 6.5. Setting. On a more positive note, I enjoyed the world of Dying Light 2. It takes place in a fictional European city called Villador, which is broken into two submaps, the latter only being able to be explored some hours into the game. The game operates a day-night system in which during the day the infected are very weak, slow, and pose relatively no threat. This is nice because it gives the setting a whole new dynamic. Most buildings are accessible through open windows, although in the day will be housed by sleeping infected, whereas at night the streets are perilous but the buildings are mostly empty. Therefore, you really have to plan your missions and routes according to the time of day. The world can be adjusted a lot by the decisions that you make, such as certain traps being available to help you on your quests. There isn't many settlements in the game, and that is due to the narrative, but there is heavier populated areas, mainly a bazaar type marketplace and a bar, both of which were relatively fun to explore and offer its own side quests. Lore and collectibles can be found around the map, and despite the odd interesting voicemail message found on an old landline phone, it was largely uninteresting. Overall, I enjoyed freely exploring the city, and the stark contrast between day and night almost gives you two different maps to explore. 8. Characters. Well, this game does feature a few pretty interesting characters. Let us firstly begin with Aiden. Aiden is our playable character, and without spoiling the story, I'll just say that he is an outsider who is new to the city. You learn about Aiden's backstory through occasional flashbacks and story moments. This was fine, but the whole narrative around Aiden's past is clouded in mystery, as it's a big part of the game's plot. This was fine and makes sense, but also made it a bit harder to kind of relate to Aiden. You learn more about him as you play, which makes him as a character feel pretty soulless in the early stages of the game. I'll mention dialogue choices a bit more later on, but the ability to do this, I guess, gives you a bit of creative freedom as to how to mould your Aiden into how you want him to be. Supporting characters are aplenty, and there are several interesting ones. However, what I would say is they can kind of come and go pretty quickly. It was hard to properly connect with any of them, perhaps with the exception of one character which appears in the second part of the game. As for the antagonist, I guess as is the nature of an action RPG, there are several bad guys, but one main bad guy that you're exposed to pretty early on who remains the main enemy. Although you're not often exposed to conversations with this person, it's normally restricted to fight scenes or just running away. It was interesting, intimidating, and a well-constructed character. I will note that the game did do a good job of populating the world with some quirky and funny NPCs. In bleak games shrouded in death and sadness, it's important to also have some light relief here and there. Rockstar and Bethesda are particularly strong developers at doing this. Although this game might have benefited from more of it, there were some really funny moments and people around the world to break the game up. Finally, this game has been slated for its voice acting, with some top review channels saying it's amongst the worst they have ever seen or heard in a video game. I don't think it was at all that bad, though perhaps not good. The people who matter, Aiden and the main supporting characters and enemies, are voiced well, and the cast is quite impressive. I think it's the smaller characters and quest givers that lacked a bit of charisma, and that speaks more to laziness or budget restraints for Techland opposed to inability. Overall, I did enjoy the characters, but I just wanted a bit more exposure and backstory around them. It felt like a lonely world at times. 7. Gameplay. If there's one main thing that Dying Light 1 got right, it was the gameplay. Many people claimed it was revolutionary and made the action RPG industry stand up and pay attention. Dying Light 2 picks up that torch and runs with it fast. The game is mostly based on parkour elements, scaling buildings, and using impressively complex melee fighting skills. For many years in video games, I've felt parkour gameplay has become a bit stuck. I feel like every game has adopted the Assassin's Creed style of climbing a building and never really evolved past that. Now, that mechanic was good, but it was good in 2007. Dying Light 2, in my opinion, has placed the benchmark. It won't feel easy to begin with, but once you master it and combine it with perks, you feel so free and fluid, leaping from building to building. The forced first-person perspective also enhances the parkour, but if you're not used to first-person games, it will feel a little bit odd at first. Above all, it's challenging. Even towards the final stages of the game, I found myself being slightly too bold with certain jumps and plummeting to my death below. Without doubt, I died more in this game from falling than I did from the infected. Combat is really unique and gets stronger and more fun as you progress your skills. This isn't just a hack and slash or hold the counter button type of combat. You really have to think and be aware of your surroundings. It's one of the few games in recent history where the perk skill tree really does make a huge difference. Normally I check it every few hours and think, oh, I have 10 skill points to assign. In this, I was regularly checking how much XP I needed for my next point. That's how much each changes your gameplay. A small negative on this point, the gameplay is enhanced by some of the items that you can equip. However, some of these are locked due to the narrative, which makes sense, but I'd suggest that maybe they were locked for a bit too long. The inventory is pretty well laid out and I liked the menu. The main issue is it came with horrendous performance issues. Now yes, it could be isolated just to me, but my menu and inventory seemed so slow to operate. But I'll talk more about that a little bit later on. Conversations come with dialogue choices. Some, but not all, change the direction of the story. It's normally made obvious when this is the case. Ranged combat exists, but wasn't hugely enjoyable, although I'd suggest that the game is designed to be melee based. It's one of the freshest gameplay experiences in this type of game that I've witnessed in a long time. Overall, it scores 9. Visuals. So it's worth stating that this review is from a PS4 playthrough. Now I didn't make a huge song and dance about that at the start of this video because in truth, the only elements of this review that the platform affects is visuals and performance, and the rest is all still relative. So you're seeing PS4 captured footage, and this comes with a host of performance issues, which I'll get into in the later category, but taking that out, I think the visuals are pretty strong. This isn't God of War or a Horizon game, so don't go into it expecting to see a movie-esque experience. This is good old traditional RPG looking. It doesn't reinvent the wheel, it doesn't necessarily stand out, but equally, it doesn't feel dated. Some scenes can appear to be beautifully crafted and showcase some really stunning lighting, whereas others can look a bit bland. It was strong, I guess just inconsistent. I think this is a unique game in which the fighting visuals actually look stronger than the up-close face cutscenes. The use of blood and gore was appropriate and really added to the game. Nighttime is very dark, but intentionally, as it adds to the whole danger element of that time of day. The use of UV lights, which are used as a deterrent to the infected, creates a nice purple element dotted around the map, which looks great at night. I might be wrong, but I can't remember any specific weather changes. It felt like the game was just always overcast or sunny for the entirety. I don't really remember encountering any rain and definitely no snow. 7. Bugs. Okay, so bear in mind that I played this game from release day, so if you're considering picking up this game in the future, it might be worth a quick Google search to see how this game is currently performing. But from day one, this game was fucking horrendously bad. Seriously, one of the worst that I can remember, and that comes from someone who has recently played Cyberpunk. And you know what, I partly put my criticism of the story down to this. I could never get into the flow of the game because it would crash so often. Face rendering issues and frame rate drops were pretty frequent, but I can normally live with that. The biggest issue I encountered was a weird bug where the text and voice would just skip during scenes, almost like I was spamming the skip line button. This made it impossible for me to understand what was going on in the story and led to me having to reboot the game. A reboot did fix it, but the issue would soon reappear in the next few hours. And I'll be honest, normally the frustration of this bug led to me closing the game and just playing something else. They did introduce a day one patch, which to its credit has improved that issue, but it's still not a clean game. And if I were to play this game for 4 hours straight, I'm guaranteed to run into something which isn't quite right. There are also lazy narrative issues. Because you can mold your story through your choices, sometimes mistakes slip through. For example, at one point, I was introduced to a guy who I had already met and done a pretty lengthy mission with earlier on in the game, and no one seemed to reference the fact that we actually already knew each other. Overall, it scores, and I'm sorry Techland, 3. But do a quick Google search if you're buying this game in the future to find out how it's doing now. Length. So a rumour did pop up that this game would last 300 hours or some bollocks like that. Well, that's a complete myth. Well, I mean, any game really can last 300 hours if you want it to, but you'd get bored pretty quickly with this one. The main story takes around 25 hours to complete, which is maybe standard, slightly above standard for an action RPG. Running around and completing the side quests and the activities will likely bump you up to around 60 hours. Completionists hoping to get all collectibles will be looking at 100 or above. I feel like the length roughly justified the story, but it's a hard one to review when you're not really enjoying the story. The early parts of the game, although acting as a kind of soft introduction stroke tutorial to the game, perhaps wasn't needed to the extent that it was present. Without giving away too much, in the first few hours you're trying to get somewhere, and several people offer you help in getting there. But, you guessed it, you have to do something for them first. There was a lot of back and forth in the early stages of the game, which maybe could have been taken out. Overall, the length is good, and despite its uninspiring story, Techland do fill their world with lots of interesting things to keep you busy. 8. Fun. Is this game fun? Well, there's 2 levels to this. As a story campaign alone, I'd say no. I finished the story because I wanted to get this review finished and I needed to know how it ended, not because I was invested or cared about how it ended. So in a way that felt like a chore. However, running around the map and leaping from the rooftops is fun and honestly never gets boring. There is a limited fast travel element in the game, but I very rarely used it due to the fun parkour elements. Side quests, like most games of this genre, are a bit hit and miss, but the ones that hit were very good and often quite unique and even humorous. I'd say this is a game which makes a nice secondary game. Like if you're playing something else and maybe putting a good few hours into that, but you want something else to maybe break it up, then this is, like an hour blaster. 6. Replayability. So despite my negative words towards the story, the game does inspire you to play it again. It's not one that I'm yearning to pick up again for a while. In truth, I'm partly glad it's over, but due to the impressively complex ability to mold your narrative, you can play this game again and experience something pretty different. Or, if you're like me, you'll play it again in a year, forget your first playthrough decisions and make the very same choices all over again. 7. Value. So this rates what the game is currently listed at and whether it's worth that money. Already this game is down to £44/$57 from its release price, and after just a few months in, that's an interesting drop. I'd still say, however, it isn't worth that price. Assuming the performance issues get fixed, I'd peg this game for around £25/$32. That's what I think you'd get the most value for your money at. But at current, it scores 5. And there we have it, our full scores for Dying Light 2. Now, I may have come across overly harsh on this one, but I think for all the hype and promise, mainly created by its predecessor, Techland haven't actually expanded the series that much. The gaming industry is drowning in post-apocalyptic games, and I think you have to do something really special to stand out, and this game didn't. For more reviews and story recaps of your favourite games, please do hit subscribe.